When you look at the way Canada decided to bring Michael Jackson into the conversation, it wasn't just clever, it was powerful. Because symbols matter, culture matters. And the people we choose as our cultural touchstones say more about us than the speeches of politicians or the slogans on campaign posters. Michael Jackson is not just a pop star, he is a symbol of contradiction, of brilliance and pain, of glory and tragedy. And when Canada used him as a mirror, it sent a shockwave. It was saying to America, you cannot hide your hypocrisy when we hold up your own cultural giant against you. Think about this. Michael Jackson was one of the most celebrated human beings in history. The king of pop. His music broke barriers, united races, and redefined what entertainment could be. At his peak, he was loved everywhere on earth. But at the same time, the very country that celebrated him also tore him apart. They glorified him when he sold out stadiums, but they crucified him when his flaws and struggles became too visible. That contradiction is not just about one man. It's about a system, a culture that builds people up only to destroy them when they no longer serve its image. Now, Canada understood something here. They understood that if you want to reveal the truth about a nation, you don't go after the statistics or the GDP charts or the endless political debates. You go after the myths. You go after the stories people tell about themselves. And Michael Jackson is one of America's greatest myths. He is the embodiment of what America claims to stand for: opportunity, success, fame, reinvention. But he is also the embodiment of what America wants to ignore: exploitation, hypocrisy, cruelty to its own icons. By holding up Michael Jackson as the mirror, Canada was not just criticizing America. They were exposing the truth in a way that no politician ever could. This is the psychology of symbols. Human beings don't move because of numbers, they move because of meaning. They are stirred by stories, they are driven by metaphors, they are changed by images that resonate deep inside. When we hear Michael Jackson's name, we don't think of policy or law, we think of a feeling. We think of Billy Joe echoing through the world. We think of the moonwalk on stage. We think of the little boy from Gary, Indiana, who became a global phenomenon. And then, if we're honest, we also think of how he was torn down, mocked, judged, abandoned. That emotional tension is what makes him such a powerful weapon when you want to expose hypocrisy. Canada's brilliance here was to understand that the battle of nations today is not fought only with weapons or dollars. It's fought with narratives. It's fought with symbols that pierce through the noise. America can dismiss Canada's policies, they can ignore Canada's economy, but they cannot ignore Michael Jackson. Because Michael Jackson is not Canadian, he is American. He belongs to them. And when someone uses your own symbol to reveal your flaws, you cannot run. You have to face it. This is why I say cultural power is the deepest kind of power. You can resist someone's arguments, but you cannot resist your own reflection. And that is exactly what Michael Jackson has become: America's reflection. For decades, the U.S. has used culture as a weapon around the world. Hollywood, music, celebrities, symbols of freedom and success. But what happens when someone flips that weapon back and says, look closely at your own star. Look at what you did to him. That is not just strategy. That is philosophy in action. And here's the bigger lesson for all of us, beyond nations, beyond politics. Every one of us has symbols in our lives. We have myths we live by, stories we tell ourselves. Sometimes those stories are inspiring, but sometimes they are hiding uncomfortable truths. Canada showed that the real courage is not in avoiding those truths, but in facing them head on. To take the very thing you celebrate and ask, what does this really say about who I am? Michael Jackson is not just a story about music. He is a story about human psychology, about how we treat genius, how we handle vulnerability, how we consume greatness until it breaks. And Canada, by using his image, forced America and the rest of us to confront how easy it is to celebrate a symbol while destroying the human behind it. That is not just an American problem. That is a human problem. So the question I want to leave you with is this: when you look in the mirror of your own culture, your own life, are you willing to see the contradictions? Or will you keep pretending they don't exist? Because strength is not in hiding weakness. Strength is in confronting it. And if a nation can do that, if a person can do that, then they become unstoppable. America has always been very good at telling the world who it is. It calls itself the land of the free, the defender of justice, the country where dreams come true. And let's be honest, that image has inspired millions of people around the world. People left everything behind in their homelands because they believed in that story. They believed in the American dream. They believed in the Statue of Liberty. They believed that if you worked hard, you could succeed. That is the branding of America, and it's one of the most powerful brands in human history. But here's the problem: when you create such a powerful image, you also create a shadow. You create a gap between the story you tell and the reality you live, and the bigger that gap gets, the more fragile your credibility becomes. That is what hypocrisy is. It's when your actions betray your words. And there is nothing more dangerous for a superpower than to lose the trust of others because your image doesn't match your reality. This is exactly what Michael Jackson's story reveals. He was the ultimate symbol of American greatness. Talent, success, fame, innovation. He broke barriers in music. He brought people together across races and borders. He represented what the United States wanted to project to the world. That here anything is possible. But then look at how he was treated when his life became complicated. The same country that worshipped him also destroyed him. They built him up as an icon and then dismantled him piece by piece until the very people who cheered for him were the ones laughing at his downfall. That contradiction is not just about Michael Jackson. It's about America itself. Because if a country can do that to its brightest star, to the very person who embodied its cultural power, what does that say about how it treats allies, partners, and even its own citizens? It says, we will celebrate you when it serves us, but we will abandon you the moment you become inconvenient. That is the hypocrisy Canada was pointing to. And it's not just a critique, it's a revelation. It's holding a mirror up to the United States and asking, can you really call yourself the leader of freedom and fairness if this is how you treat your own? Now let's go deeper into the psychology here. Hypocrisy is not just a political flaw, it's a human flaw. Every one of us knows that feeling when someone says one thing and does another. It creates distrust, it creates resentment, it creates disillusionment. And once trust is broken, it is almost impossible to rebuild. Nations are no different. America has been the most powerful voice on freedom and justice for decades, but when its actions contradict that voice, the entire world notices. And once people start noticing, they stop believing. Canada, by using Michael Jackson, exposed this crack in America's credibility in a way that words alone could never do. Because remember, hypocrisy is most powerful when it is shown, not when it is told. If Canada had stood up and said, America is hypocritical, people would have dismissed it as politics. But when they used Michael Jackson, when they used America's own symbol, it became undeniable. The hypocrisy was revealed from within. And this is where the philosophy becomes very simple, but very hard. You cannot preach what you do not practice. You cannot demand loyalty, respect, and admiration if you do not give it in return. Leadership, whether personal or national, is built on alignment between words and actions. When there is alignment, people follow you. When there is no alignment, people eventually turn away. So here is the lesson. America's hypocrisy is not just about global politics. It is a warning to every one of us. If you build your life on a false image, if you project one thing but live another, sooner or later that gap will be exposed. And when it is exposed, people will lose faith in you. The same way America risks losing faith from the world, we risk losing faith from the people around us if we live in contradiction. That's why what Canada did is so important. They didn't just torch America's hypocrisy. They reminded us of the cost of hypocrisy in general. They reminded us that strength is not about how loud you shout, but about how consistent you are. The world does not follow the biggest words, it follows the clearest actions. So let me ask you this, are your actions in alignment with your words? When you say you stand for something, do your choices prove it? Because the truth is, credibility is the most valuable currency any of us will ever have. For nations, for leaders who, for me, it's all the same. And once credibility is gone, it is almost impossible to buy back. That is the real message hidden inside this story. Hypocrisy is weakness disguised as strength. And if America or any of us wants to lead, the first step is to eliminate the gap between what we say and what we do. That is how you earn trust. That is how you build strength that lasts. And that is how you make sure no one can ever hold up your own reflection and use it against you. When people think about strategy, they usually think about politics, economics, or military strength. They think about numbers. How many tanks, how many soldiers, how much money, how many resources. But strategy in the modern world has shifted. We don't live in the age of raw muscle anymore. We live in the age of influence, and influence is psychological. It's not about how much power you have, it's about how you use perception, how you use narrative, how you shape the story people believe. That's where Canada pulled off something brilliant. By using Michael Jackson as a cultural metaphor, Canada didn't fire a shot, they didn't impose sanctions, they didn't raise their voice at the United States. Instead, they used one of the most recognized cultural figures in history to tell a story that exposed American contradictions. That's not random, that's not luck. That is a calculated, intentional, strategic move. And it worked because it used the weapon America itself has relied on for decades, culture. Think about it, America has always dominated the world not just with its military, but with its stories. Hollywood, Disney, Netflix, Coca-Cola, Marvel, these are not just brands or entertainment. These are weapons of cultural dominance. They tell the world how to think about America. They make people from every corner of the earth admire American lifestyles, American dreams, American heroes, that is soft power, and it has been one of America's greatest strengths. But here's the genius of Canada's move. They flipped it. They said, all right, America, you like to use culture as a weapon. Then we'll take one of your biggest cultural icons and turn him into a mirror that reveals your hypocrisy. That is what I call a masterstroke, because it takes the opponent's own strength and makes it a weakness. In strategy, this is called judo. You don't always win by striking harder. Sometimes you win by using your opponent's force against them. America created Michael Jackson. It celebrated him. It exported him to the world as a symbol of American greatness. But when Canada used him as a metaphor for hypocrisy, suddenly the symbol turned into a blade. America couldn't deny it because the symbol was their own. This is why narrative warfare is so powerful. When you control the story, you control the battlefield without anyone even realizing it. Most people think war is about weapons, but the real war is about beliefs. If you can make people believe your story, you don't need to fight them. And if you can make your opponent's story collapse under its own contradictions, you've already won. Michael Jackson was the perfect figure for this because his life already carried the weight of contradiction. His genius and his tragedy were known everywhere. By evoking him, Canada didn't have to explain the hypocrisy, they just had to trigger the memory, and people around the world connected the dots themselves. That's the highest level of strategy, because the best message is the one people convince themselves of. And here is the lesson for us. Strategy today is about psychology. It's about understanding how people think, how they feel, how they interpret meaning. You can't just hammer your message. You have to slip it into the imagination of the people. Once it's there, it grows on its own. That's how you build influence that no army can match. Now let's step back for a second. What does this mean for you, for me, for anyone who wants to lead? It means that the most powerful strategies are invisible. They don't look like strategies. They look like stories. They look like symbols. They look like simple moves that nobody notices at first. But when they land, they hit deeper than anything else. Canada could have shouted about American hypocrisy, but nobody would care. Instead, they painted a picture with Michael Jackson. That picture spoke louder than any accusation. That's the kind of thinking we all need. Stop trying to overpower people with noise and force. Start thinking about the deeper psychology. Ask yourself, what story are they already telling themselves, and how can I redirect it? That is the key to influence. And if nations understand this, they can win without fighting. If leaders understand this, they can inspire without demanding. And if individuals understand this, they can shape their lives in ways that nobody sees coming. That's why Canada's move is so important. It's a reminder that the game has changed. The battlefield is no longer just land, money, and power. The battlefield is narrative. The winners are the ones who understand the human mind, who can take symbols and turn them into tools. And in this case, Canada showed the world that even a smaller nation can outmaneuver a giant if they play the psychological game correctly. So let me leave you with this. Don't just look at the obvious battles. Look at the hidden ones. Don't just fight with strength. Fight with meaning. Because in a world ruled by stories, the one who controls the story controls everything. When we talk about Michael Jackson, we're not just talking about a singer or a dancer or even an entertainer. We're talking about a phenomenon that crossed every line humans usually draw between each other. Race, language, religion, nationality, it didn't matter. His music reached people everywhere. From Los Angeles to Lagos, from Moscow to Mumbai, from Toronto to Tokyo, Michael Jackson was not just an American star, he was a global presence. That is why Canada's choice to invoke him carries so much weight. Because the resonance of his story doesn't stop at America's borders. It travels, it echoes, it belongs to everyone. Now, this is what makes his symbolism so powerful. Most nations have cultural icons, but very few icons achieve what Michael Jackson achieved: universal recognition. You don't need to explain who he is. You don't need subtitles, you don't need translation. You just say his name and instantly, people everywhere feel something. That emotional connection is priceless. It's bigger than politics, bigger than economics, bigger than geography. And here's the thing, his story was not just one of triumph. It was also one of struggle, of pain, of injustice. That duality is what gives it force. Because people don't just admire perfection, they relate to imperfection. They don't just connect with your success, they connect with your suffering. Michael Jackson embodied both. He was the king of pop, but he was also the man torn apart by the very system that elevated him. And in that contradiction, people around the world saw a reflection of their own lives, their own countries, their own struggles. That's why Canada's move worked on a global scale. By aligning themselves with Jackson's symbolism, they weren't just criticizing America to Americans, they were opening the conversation to the entire world. because everyone everywhere knew the story, and everyone everywhere understood the lesson. America didn't just betray an artist, it betrayed a universal dream. And when you betray something the world shares, the world notices. This is the psychology of global resonance. Human beings are wired to connect to stories that cross personal boundaries. When something becomes universal, it gains a power that governments cannot control. You can shut down a speech, you can censor a headline, but you cannot erase a song people already carry in their hearts. You cannot erase an image that is etched into memory. That's why Michael Jackson is untouchable as a symbol. His reach is too deep, too wide, too lasting. Now, let's put this in perspective. America has often relied on its global cultural dominance to set the tone for the world. Hollywood told us what heroes look like. Music told us what freedom feels like. Celebrities told us what success should be. But when Canada invoked Michael Jackson, they exposed the dark side of that dominance. They showed that even America's most beloved global export came with a cost, that behind the glitter was betrayal, exploitation, hypocrisy. And because Michael Jackson was already universal, the critique became universal too. It wasn't Canada versus America, it became the world versus the lie. And that's a powerful lesson for all of us. If you want to create impact, don't just think locally. Don't just think in terms of what convinces your neighbors. Think in terms of universality. Ask yourself what resonates with everyone. What symbols, what stories, what truths go beyond boundaries. Because those are the forces that cannot be stopped. This is also why the most enduring leaders, the most enduring movements always connect to something universal. Martin Luther King didn't just speak to Black America. He spoke to the universal desire for dignity. Gandhi didn't just speak to Indians, he spoke to the universal desire for freedom. Michael Jackson didn't just sing to fans, he sang to the universal desire for love, unity, and expression. When you tap into that level, you stop being local, you become global, you become timeless. So what Canada did here was more than just a political jab. It was a reminder of the kind of power that actually shapes the future. Not the power of borders, not the power of armies, but the power of resonance. If you can find the story that everybody feels, you can move the world. And let's be clear, this applies to you too. You don't need to be a country to harness universal resonance. As a person, as a leader, as a creator, as a thinker, you can choose to connect your actions, your words, your life to something bigger than yourself. If your message only serves you, it will die with you. But if your message serves a truth that everyone can feel, it will live far beyond you. That's why Michael Jackson still matters. That's why Canada's strategy hits so hard. Because when you stand on the side of something universal, you stand on the side of truth that can't be ignored. So here is the question I leave you with. Are you building your life, your choices, your legacy on something small or on something universal? Because in the end, it's the universal that endures. The most dangerous strategies are the ones you don't notice until it's too late. That's what makes psychological warfare so powerful. It doesn't arrive with tanks or missiles. It doesn't announce itself on the front page of the newspaper. It slips in quietly, and by the time you recognize what has happened, your perspective has already shifted, your confidence is shaken, your credibility is damaged. That is exactly what Canada did by using Michael Jackson. They didn't march into Washington with demands. They didn't wave a finger at America in front of the United Nations. They simply planted an idea, wrapped inside a cultural image so powerful that nobody could ignore it. That's how you win without fighting. People often misunderstand what real influence looks like. They think it's about shouting louder, about forcing others to see things your way, about dominating through sheer pressure. But influence doesn't work like that. True influence is invisible. It looks effortless. It feels natural. And that's why it's so dangerous. Because you don't realize you're being moved until you've already shifted. That is the art of psychological warfare. When Canada invoked Michael Jackson, they weren't just making a statement. They were shaping perception. They were planting a seed in the global consciousness that said, America is not what it pretends to be. And the brilliance is, they didn't have to keep repeating it. They didn't need a propaganda campaign. They didn't need to shout the message from the rooftops. Because once a symbol like Michael Jackson is connected to an idea, the idea carries itself. People do the work on their own. They remember the contradictions, they feel the hypocrisy, and they start questioning the story they've been told. That is why psychological strategies are more powerful than physical ones. If you can attack someone's mind, if you can alter their perception, you don't need to attack their body. You can defeat an enemy before they even step onto the battlefield. You can disarm them without firing a single bullet. That's not just strategy, that's philosophy. Because it shows us that the real battleground is always inside the human mind. Look at history. The greatest leaders understood this principle. Alexander the Great didn't just conquer territories, he spread a culture, an idea of what it meant to be part of his empire. The Roman Empire didn't just win battles, they built narratives of Roman superiority that lasted centuries. Even in modern times, the Cold War wasn't just fought with nuclear weapons, it was fought with ideology, with movies, with music, with images of prosperity versus oppression. Nations weren't only competing for land, they were competing for minds. Canada's move with Michael Jackson fits into that same tradition. It's not about muscle, it's about meaning. It's about making the opponent face their own contradictions in a way they cannot escape. And when you do that, you weaken them from the inside, because once doubt is planted, once hypocrisy is exposed, confidence begins to crumble. Now let's bring this closer to our own lives. We may not be nations, but we are all engaged in psychological battles every single day. You face them at work, in relationships, in your personal goals. The people who succeed are not always the ones who push the hardest. They are the ones who understand psychology. They are the ones who know how to make their presence felt without forcing it. They know how to plant the right ideas at the right time. They know that power is not about intimidation, it's about influence. This is why I say the strongest strategies don't look like strategies. They look like simple moves, small gestures, ordinary words. But when you choose them wisely, when you connect them to meaning, they can change everything. That's how Canada played it. They didn't look aggressive. They looked smart. They looked subtle. And in that subtlety, they achieved impact that no amount of noise could ever achieve. So the lesson here is clear: don't underestimate the power of the invisible. Don't think that only the loudest or the strongest win. Often it is the ones who understand the human mind, who know how to direct attention, who create the most lasting victories. Nations rise and fall on this principle. Leaders succeed or fail on this principle. And individuals, in their personal lives, either stagnate or grow depending on how well they understand it. So I'll leave you with this: real power is not about force, it's about influence. The world is full of people trying to shout their way into history. But history remembers the ones who understood the psychology, the ones who moved the human spirit without anyone realizing how. That is the kind of power you should seek, because once you learn to win the mind, everything else follows. At the end of the day, this is not just about Michael Jackson, and it's not even just about Canada versus the United States. It's about something deeper that applies to all of us: the courage to confront illusions. Every nation, every society, and every individual builds stories about themselves, stories of greatness, stories of virtue, stories of strength. But those stories are often incomplete. They hide contradictions, they cover up weaknesses, they protect us from facing uncomfortable truths. And yet, the longer you ignore the truth, the more powerful it becomes. That is what Canada forced into the open. They took one of America's brightest symbols and said, "Look closely. Look not at the myth, but at the reality." They forced a confrontation between the story America tells about itself and the reality it often hides. And that is the essence of leadership, whether on a global scale or in your personal life. Leadership is not about maintaining illusions. Leadership is about tearing them down and replacing them with truth, no matter how uncomfortable that truth may be. Now think about this on a human level. How often do we tell ourselves stories about who we are? We say we are disciplined, but our actions don't match. We say we are committed, but we give up when it gets hard. We say we are strong, but we avoid the very challenges that would prove it. That is hypocrisy on a personal level. And just like America, if you live in that contradiction long enough, sooner or later, someone or something will hold up a mirror and expose it. The question is, do you want to wait for the mirror, or do you want to be the one who faces it first? Because strength is not the absence of weakness. Strength is the willingness to look at weakness honestly, to confront it, and to turn it into fuel for growth. Canada showed that exposing hypocrisy is not an act of destruction. It's an act of leadership, because once the lie is gone, you are finally free to build something real. This is why the moment matters. It's not about humiliating America. It's about reminding all of us that credibility and strength come from alignment. If what you say and what you do are not aligned, you cannot lead. Not as a country, not as a leader, not as a person. But when you bring those two together, when your story matches your reality, then you become unstoppable. Because nobody can use your contradictions against you anymore. And this is what I want you to think about. What contradictions are you carrying? What illusions are you still protecting? Maybe you tell yourself you're healthy, but you don't take care of your body. Maybe you say you want success, but you avoid the discipline it requires. Maybe you say you value relationships, but you neglect the people closest to you. These contradictions are not small. They are cracks in the foundation. And the longer you hide them, the weaker you become. But here's the good news: the moment you decide to face them, you grow stronger instantly. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to erase every weakness. What you need is honesty. Because honesty builds credibility, honesty builds trust, and trust, whether between nations, leaders, or individuals, is the most powerful form of strength there is. That's why Canada's move was more than strategy. It was a challenge. It was saying, stop pretending, stop hiding, confront your contradictions, and that's the challenge we should all take personally. Stop living under illusions. Stop telling yourself stories that protect your ego but weaken your life. Instead, take ownership of your reality. Because once you own it, no one can use it against you. And let me tell you something I've learned in my own life. People respect the truth even when it's ugly more than they respect a polished illusion. Because the truth has power. It gives you a foundation to build from. Illusions, on the other hand, collapse the moment pressure hits. So ask yourself, are you building your life on something real or something that looks good but won't last? Canada's strategy was brilliant because it revealed hypocrisy. But the real brilliance is in the lesson it leaves us with. Leadership requires truth. Nations need it. Leaders need it. And you need it. So here is my closing challenge to you. Don't be afraid of the mirror. Don't run from the truth. Because the ones who dare to confront reality, whether it's beautiful or brutal, are the ones who gain the power to shape it. And that is the only way to build something that lasts.